Well, welcome to question 115 of the Secunda Secunda. The topic for today is irony. Irony has a very short definition in the Catechism, a very short section. It says, so irony is aimed at disparaging someone by maliciously caricaturing some aspect of his behavior. And it's in relationship to truth under the topic. Now, if you recall from question 110 on lying, the middle path is truth, excess is boasting, deficiency is irony. So this is a deficiency in the truth. If we look to what St. Thomas points out from St. Augustine, he says, if thou liest on account of humility, if thou wert not a sinner before lying, thou hast become one lying. So even if you were in good shape before, if you're saying, oh, I'm a terrible sinner, and you're not, or you're claiming a sin that's not yours, you didn't have that sin, but now you have the sin of lying on your soul, a violation of truth. So it's clear that both St. Thomas and St. Augustine think that irony is a form of lying, which therefore is a disordered speech act. There's two ways of belittling oneself, lowering oneself. The first way is when someone has some great virtue, but they also have some deficiencies, and instead of talking about their great virtue, they talk about their deficiencies. If one were to talk about their actual deficiencies, then it's not a lie. The fact that they avoided talking about their great virtue doesn't make it a lie. It could be an act of humility to talk about what you're deficient in rather than what you excel in. So, if your goal is to guard truth, as he says, or to be humble by, again, not lying, but simply focusing on your deficiencies, there's no sin. However, when a person denies, they lie about great virtue that they have, then that's a lie. So that would be irony. And if a person were to take something that they were deficient in and to bloat it, that would be boasting. So you can be wrong. You can be a liar by fabricating virtues you don't have or denying virtues that you do have. So both of those would be disordered speech acts because they would be essentially lying. One of the oppositions, or the most frequent opposition to the idea that irony, which is the deficiency of truth, being a sin, would be saying, well, isn't it humbling to point out sins, more so than boasting? If one were to even exaggerate their sins, make up sins, it would humble them more. Therefore, wouldn't that be virtuous? And it points out from the prophet Amos, where even Amos says, I am no prophet. How could Amos say, I am no prophet, when he's the prophet Amos? Clearly, he's lying to some degree of humility. And St. Thomas's response is that Amos didn't come from a family of prophets. He wasn't a professional prophet. God had selected him to become a prophet. So he didn't have the earthly titles of prophet, but he had the wisdom of the saints, something that comes from a grace from God. So that part he does have. Likewise, if an educated person claims to be a fool, knowing that all human wisdom is foolishness, then it's not irony if somebody were to say, well, even all of my wisdom, the greatest earthly wisdom is foolishness before God, therefore I am a great fool. That's humility before God. If a highly educated person says, oh, I'm not very educated at all, I hardly read a book. You do. You are very well educated and you do read books. Well, then that's a lie. So that would be irony. It would be putting down your actual accomplishments on earth. if you have a well-disposed mind towards holiness, then you aim for very high ideals. Now, if you aim for very high ideals, you might fall slightly short. It would be important, as St. Thomas points out, not to use your shortcomings towards perfection as a sin. If somebody were to say, I'm a terrible sinner because I only said 3 rosaries today and I had intended to do 4 rosaries a day. I'm a terrible sinner because I didn't go to daily mass on a Monday of ordinary time. I'm a terrible sinner. Well, it is not a sin to skip mass on a Monday during ordinary time. It's not a sin to not do 4 rosaries a day. These are things you may aim for in your pursuit of spiritual perfection. That's wonderful. And if you fall short, you can work on getting better at it. But you can go into the confessional and confess that you didn't go to mass on Monday because it's not a sin. You can't confess a non-sin. Likewise, if one were to say, I am a terrible sinner because, and you come up with things that aren't actual sins, that would be irony. So it's wonderful to seek holiness, but you can't make up sins that you don't possess. The question came up, is irony better than boasting? At least there's a level of humility, putting yourself down rather than to build yourself up. And what St. Thomas said is, one sin is not better than another sin. If you have an excess and you have a deficiency, both of them are in the wrong direction. So both of them are sins. So it would be secondary characteristics of that act that could add an additional sin. So if you did it, you boasted for material gain, now you have 2 sins. Versus if you just humble yourself because you're trying to pull yourself down for whatever reason. And if you think that makes you look more holy, then it might be 1 sin. So it could be more, it could be more, it could be less. You are recklessly humble, as St. Augustine says. You entangle yourselves in lies. It's better just to be truthful, just to be accurate, than it is to make up brokenness that you don't have, or to boast and pretend that you don't have certain ones. Aristotle says boasting is more grievous than irony because it involves pride. What St. Thomas points out is that irony could be more grievous because if one were to pretend to be lowly in order to gain the respect of other people, they could be more cunningly deceiving. If you think who might look, put on the airs of poverty, let's say there was a rich person, they put on a trash bag and laid out in order to get money, donations or something like that. Then by putting on the poverty, the image of poverty, you used it to deceive others. And you can probably think of many of examples when people could use the image of poverty in order to deceive. This comes right from the scriptures where Christ says, don't cover yourself in ashes to be a spectacle of the world. If you're going to fast, do it privately because your Heavenly Father knows that you're fasting. You don't need to tell everybody else that you're fasting. So this part is an important one. He says, if a person disfigures his face that he may appear unto men to fast, the person is guilty of irony and boasting. You're guilty of both excess and deficiency. You showed yourself to be deficient in order to actually boast about how deficient you are. So both of those would be wrong. And he points out, St. Augustine says that he says of St. Augustine always made sure that he wore clothes that were appropriate. He never wore clothes that made him look shabby, and he never made clothes that made him look too rich, but both of those are seeking the attention of other people. And the attention of other people isn't where a person's focus should be. It should be to please God. So it's better to just be yourself. Just be in that middle path. In conclusion, this section on irony is quite simple, but one can give glory and praise to God for one's own state of life. You don't have to pretend to be poor or more miserable than you are. You don't have to boast and try to pretend to be greater than you are. If you're doing it in order to impress other people, you're misdirecting your spiritual effort. You really should be focusing on what God thinks, not about trying to convince other people what you really are. Certainly, you shouldn't lie in order to try to convince other people who you think that you should be. You should certainly to make yourself look more penitent to impress other people. And the real goal is back to that kind of claritas image, the image of simplicity, where you're like clear crystal water, where you can look into the lake and see all of the rocks and everything in the bottom, where exactly what you are, you are. That's the ideal goal. So your actions and your words reflect claritas. That's all I have for today.